Ireland's mother struggled to settle down, and by the age of 10, he'd changed schools 6 times. They had also changed home 9 times, including a short spell in a homeless shelter for women and children.
And then she met a new husband. They had a child together, and they made the decision that it was too hard to raise both these children in the same household. And so he was sent away and put in a home. And the message that gets sent when a parent does that is, you're just baggage. You're not a part of my future. I don't love you. I'll dispose of you when and as I see fit.
And this is a really crucial time for our development as children. Our relationships with our parents are absolutely fundamental at this point in time. And when you have an interrupted or a disrupted attachment, particularly with your mother, that has a real impact on your ability to form attachments with other people throughout your life. So you've got all of the ingredients for at least a problematic life, but unfortunately, it's not just problematic, it becomes fatal.
Constantly on the move, Ireland regularly found himself as the new boy at yet another school.
Witnesses that we spoke to told us that he was picked on at school, and it was a bit of a loner, really.
He was not a popular child at school. He was bullied by others. And when you have that sense of isolation from your peers and that inability to form those relationships, you do really turn in on yourself and you become very insular, very isolated. And your reaction to others' behaviour towards you is maladaptive, it's abnormal. So he would react by being violent, he would react by setting fire to things. So there are some real warning signs here of a very, very troubled individual indeed.
In 1966, 12-year-old Ireland found himself a summer job in his hometown of Dartford.
At one point he was working in a fairground and a man propositioned him with gifts if he had sex with him. We can only with hindsight say that that may well have shaped his view of gay men.
And often sexual predators will prey on people like him. So they would have picked up on those vulnerabilities. They would have picked up on the fact that he was the odd one out, that he didn't have much of a support network around him, and targeted him for these advances.
You have, in this petri dish of adolescence, all these things added together. Abandoned, mother struggling in poverty, school to school, bullied, an extraordinary conflation of ingredients that might make a serial killer. And slowly but surely, that reality began to emerge.
As Ireland grew up, life didn't get any easier. He often found himself on the wrong side of the law.
By the time he was in his late 20s, he'd already accumulated a fairly substantial criminal record. He'd been in and out of prison for things like robbery, theft, deception type offences, and he became interested in survivalism.
Admitted. So here's an individual who knows how to cover his tracks, and he's got that in mind from the outset.
He was not a teenager or an aggressive young man of 22. He was a man who had thought out what was going to happen. And what was going to happen was a spree of killings that was to send shivers down the spine of the gay community in London.
As well as a type of victim, Ireland had identified a hunting ground, a gay pub in the Earl's Court district of London called the Coleherne Arms. He was confident he'd be able to entice his prey.
He'd gone from this kind of skinny youth to being quite a burly, well-built, big guy. He was quite tall, a sort of imposing presence. Obviously, in that sense, that sort of sadomasochistic thing, he might have appealed to a certain type of man who wanted to be dominated by another man.
With everything in place, Ireland was ready to kill for the first time. On the night of March the 8th, 1993, he met his unsuspecting victim.
Peter Walker was a 45-year-old theatre director that Ireland met in the Coleherne Arms. They went back to Walker's flat.
Peter Walker has 2 dogs, a Labrador and a German Shepherd. They shut the dogs in the living room, and proceed into the bedroom. Peter accepts that sadomasochism is part of the routine that he likes to play, part of the role, and therefore allows Ireland to tie him to the bed.
And Ireland whipped him, and he held a plastic bag over his head and suffocated him.
With plastic bag asphyxia, you're looking at a situation where it's lack of oxygen that causes you to die rather than lack of blood flow to your brain. And that is a much more prolonged and much more unpleasant feeling. Anyone who's kept their head under a swimming pool for a bit longer than they normally would will know that air hunger, as it's called, that desire to breathe, and knowing that that's not going to be allowed would be a terrible way to die.
After killing Peter Walker, Ireland created a bizarre spectacle at the scene.
He drapes condoms over his victim's face. He poses 2 teddy bears in the oral sex position. And this is demeaning to his victim. So he's not just killed his victim, he's humiliated him as well. And this is something that Ireland is doing to say, hey, everybody, look at me. This isn't just a murder. This is more than just a murder.
And Ireland's cruelty didn't end there.
He set fire to his pubic hair. He said later to see what it smelt like. The poor man was already dead. Why humiliate his body anymore?
Ireland didn't flee Peter Walker's flat with any urgency. He spent the night there, cleaning up any evidence that he may have left behind before disposing of the murder kit on the morning train back to Southend.
He was thrown cuffs in the Thames or out of a train window and disposed of every single murder weapon that he used to kill or strangle them.
So clearly, evidence that would be on that.
To go home to the flat.
After forcing Emanuel Spiteri to give him his cash card and PIN number, Ireland strangled him to death with a rope. This time, the 39-year-old killer tried a new way to hide the evidence.
There'd been an attempt to burn the flat. The furniture had been piled up. He'd clearly set fire to it. Oxygen had run out, and that's why it went out. And very, very fortunately, because it was a top-floor flat, and he could easily have killed people below and to the side of it.
We know that he's done a lot of reading around cases of serial murder. He's probably got an awareness that fire is one of the few things that will destroy DNA. So I think what's going on here is that he's trying to destroy the evidence that links him to the scene. But at the same time, he wants recognition for the crime as well. What he was doing was creating another murder, creating another scene, and trying to get recognition, but still maintain that anonymity.
Luckily, the fire Ireland had started had gone out and the flat didn't burn down. 3 days later, on the 15th of June, Emanuel Spiteri's landlady found her lodger dead and called the police. They retraced Emanuel Spiteri's last steps and for the first time got a look at the killer's face.
Fortunately, he was captured on CCTV at Charing Cross Station, so we've got Emanuel, 5'2", in front of Colin Ireland, 6'1", on a single shot just coming out of the tube station. Not very clear of the head, but you can see the build and the height, and clearly you've got Emanuel in front of him.
So that was a crucial piece of evidence. Although, obviously, it was not a piece of evidence which would necessarily confirm that he was the killer, but it was that kind of circumstantial evidence on which a case can be built.
Armed with the image, the police went on full offensive to try and catch the killer.
They managed to blow up the image to get something that was a reasonable representation of Ireland. They didn't know what Ireland looked like at the time, but it was something that they could use in publicity to attract attention to the case, to circulate, crucially, amongst the gay community.
Myself and Ken John did a midnight press conference because we were concerned that people were being too relaxed about it. We gave a description of who we were looking for and to warn them that they had to be careful because the next one could be you.
I think there was a general call out amongst the gay community to be very careful who you go home with tonight, kind of thing. There was a great fear, there was great concern.
With the police closing in, Colin Ireland decided there was no point in hiding, and on the 19th of July, he went to see a solicitor.
He decided that I'll go into the solicitor, and he gave an affidavit. He said that, yes, I am the man in the video. Yes, I did go to Emmanuel Spiteri's address, but when I got to the front door, there was another man in the flat. I didn't want a threesome, so I went home. It was too late to get a train, so I slept in a nearby churchyard.
Unbeknownst to Ireland, someone from the solicitor's office passed on his details to the police, who already had his fingerprints on file from previous offences.
Eventually we got Ireland's name, cross-matched it against the mark, and it was his. So that placed Colin Ireland in the crime scene, and although you can't date a fingerprint, it most certainly helped in the totality of the evidence.
On the 20th of July 1993, Colin Ireland was arrested. On the 22nd, he was charged with the murder of 33-year-old Andrew Collier. The following day, on the 23rd of July, he was charged with the murder of 41-year-old Emmanuel Spiteri.
If Colin Ireland had not been caught when he was, he would have continued to kill relentlessly until he was eventually stopped. It is the classic element of any serial killer. They won't stop until someone stops them.
And there was lots of work done. We had ID parades, we had voice ID parades, forensication, and lots of other things. He never opened his mouth for 3 days. But fortunately, because of the similar fact evidence from the...
So Bobby Joe Long's mother used to work in bars. She was single, she was on her own with him, she had to go out and work, she was the breadwinner.
As a child, Long suffered many accidents, head injuries that caused several periods of unconsciousness. Some were minor, like falling from a swing. Others were more serious, falling downstairs and being thrown from a horse. One of his most serious injuries occurred at the age of 7 when he was hit by a car. The accident left him with a deformed jaw and teeth.
And the kids would worry him to death about that, and he finally had an operation on that as well. He wore those scars, you know, all of his life.
With money scarce, they lived frugally in a one-bedroom apartment, even sharing a single bed until Bobby Joe was a teenager. Bobby Joe confided in his ex-wife Cindy about his relationship with his mother.
He would tell me that certain nights that she would come home with a boyfriend, that he would get woke up and put on the couch while the boyfriend spent the night with her.
Long slept with his mother, which often angered him when she brought home a man of which there are a string. And I think it's in there somewhere that the genesis of Long's loathing for women began.
When you look at how he speaks about his mother and what he thought about her, he held her in quite a lot of contempt and disdain. He said some very offensive things about her. He criticised the fact that she worked as a barmaid, that she wore revealing outfits, and that for me says that he's got some incredibly fixed and very conservative views about women, who they are, how they should behave. They should look after their husbands, look after their children. He's got a very fixed idea of men as breadwinners and women as caregivers.
Long harboured a grudge against his mother for not looking after him or paying him enough attention.
He had a horrible resentment towards his mother. And to be very honest with you, had I have ever heard that he, had harmed his mom, I probably wouldn't have been surprised, because he really did have a hate for his mother.
And as time went on, the more time she paid to men, the more he resented it. And psychiatrists have said that that's part of his problem, that he was actually killing his mother. Again and again, he hated women.
Long had also been born with a condition that would later in life prove a challenge to his masculinity.
He had Klinefelter syndrome, which meant that he had 2 X chromosomes and 1 Y. Now, one of the symptoms of that is it gives a young boy, as he grows into adolescence, significant extra estrogen.
High levels of the female hormone can result in men developing enlarged breast tissue called gynecomastia.
This happened to Bobby Joe Long, to his great embarrassment, and I think also heightened the fact that he loathed women.
Age 13, Bobby Joe Long underwent surgery to remove his breasts, leaving ugly scars that made the young man very self-conscious about his body.
When we were kids, we were always swimming down in the Keys and everything. He would always keep a shirt on because he was embarrassed of the scars from the surgery.
By his early teens, this cocktail of anger at his mother and his own physical self-loathing was already beginning to turn Bobby Joe Long into an angry young man. Bobby Joe Long had a fresh hunting ground of Tampa Bay, where just raping and abusing women was no longer enough. He would go from being the classified ad rapist into a serial killer. Divorced from his wife, Bobby Joe Long began his sadistic murderous spree. Preying on vulnerable young women in the red light district, his need for sexual gratification was insatiable. On the 10th of May 1984, exotic dancer Lana had arranged to meet her boyfriend after work and was walking along the strip.
Lana was an Asian. She was a pole dancer in a bar on the strip. She had relocated from California, and she had a boyfriend. She was often asked to go home, to be taken home, but she didn't usually do that, even though that was extra money. Bobby Joe Long came along in the car, and he stopped the car and asked her if she'd like a ride. She got into the car, and that was his first known victim in that killing frenzied period.
Lana's body was found 3 days later by two boys near East Bay Road, Tampa. She'd been brutally raped, strangled, and her body grotesquely posed.
She had the hangman's noose around her neck, and she was cut while all that was going on. It was out of control. The ligatures showed signs of a knife, and he just left her in the field.
This was one of those cases where you have this first murder, and the individual who's been killed is associated with the sex work trade, is somebody who's seen as less deserving. And very often these murders don't get the same attention, don't get the same kind of investigation as others. So very often these first murders are real opportunities to apprehend a serial killer before they kill again.
On the 26th of May, Long struck once again. He picked up 22-year-old sex worker Michelle on the strip.
Michelle was a beauty queen at one time, and she was very pretty, but she was a drug addict, and so she did that to support her habit.
After she got in the car, Long drove to Park Road, known as the local Lover's Lane. He tied her up, beat her, and viciously raped her, and then threw her out of the car. But Michelle was still alive.
This victim has got spirit, and she puts up a fantastic fight, which makes him extremely angry. So angry indeed that he not only does he try and strangle her, he then goes on to cut her throat viciously.
So he cut the throat of one victim. He really didn't care. He wanted to get his pleasure, have his fun, and then just simply dispose of these women.
When you're getting to that level of brutality, we are beyond simply ending a life. We are into cruelty. We are into doing things for Long's own perverted pleasure. And that, to my mind, is evil.
Strangulation and the use of ligatures became Long's killing trademarks. He used ropes and a series of knots to create a collar like a hangman's noose.
With strangulation, you're very physically close and you have complete control. You have ownership of that other person while you're strangling them, and you know you have power of life and death literally in your hands.
Michelle's body was found a day later in an isolated area of Hillsborough County by a construction worker. There was no indication that Long selected women of a physical type, but during his 8-month killing spree, all of his victims were young women and the majority were sex workers.
The net is closing very quickly around Long.
They were not going to let this guy commit yet another murder. And they followed him to a movie theatre one day, and he went in and he watched a film, and the police waited outside for him to come out.
On November the 16th, 1984, Long was arrested outside a movie theatre. His Dodge Magnum was seized, and a sample of the red carpet from the vehicle was immediately submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab. When questioned about the abduction and rape of Lisa, he quickly confessed.
You said something earlier, okay, about the reason you let her go and what would happen as a result of letting her go. You want to say that again?
I knew it would lead to me getting caught.
Why did you know that?
I just knew it would. I knew she saw me. And I had a pretty good idea she could see underneath the blindfolds. And it was a real tug of war trying to decide if I should let her go or not. But I didn't want to hurt her.
But when he was interviewed about the 8 murders, he denied all knowledge of them. Within hours of sending the carpet sample from Long's car to the forensics lab, the results were back. The fibres were an exact match to the ones found on the victims and on Lisa's clothes.
There is no doubt whatever that those red carpet fibres were the link among a number of the killings and identified Bobby Joe as a serial killer.
So they tell him about the carpet fibres, and he realises that the game is up. So what he's doing here is he's trying to get back in control. So he confesses to the murders. He said, yes, it was me.
Where is it you dropped the girl? Did you ever go out and scout them ahead of time or anything, or just drove around and found them?
No, I never scouted them.
While being interviewed, Long made another shocking admission. He revealed the location of another victim, 21-year-old waitress Vicky in Hillsborough County.
But by that point, he was well aware that the scales of justice were certainly tipping against him. As if to dot the I's and cross the T's, Long drew them a map of where he dumped Vicky's body. If there was a final nail in his coffin, that was most certainly it.
So he called me, and when I answered the phone, I could tell right away something was wrong in his voice. And he said, you know, the girls, I killed the girls in Tampa. And I said, you know, you're not funny, don't mess with me like that. And then Bob asked me, he said to call his parents and tell our children that he was killed in a car accident. And I said, I'm not gonna lie to our kids, you know, and I couldn't lie to them.
But just 6 days after his arrest, another body was found in rural southern Hillsborough County, that of 18-year-old Artis, a prostitute Long picked up in March 1984. He confessed to her murder, and it's believed that Artis was his first victim. Long had now claimed the lives of 10 women. On April the 22nd, 1985, in Dade City, Pasco County, Florida, Long was tried for the murder of 18-year-old waitress and sex worker Virginia. He was found guilty and was sentenced to die by electric chair.
Age 22, he meets his wife and they get married, and things are quite normal and quite regular. But both of them have a bit of an issue with alcohol. Both of them tend to drink to excess, and their relationship becomes quite volatile and quite chaotic. They attract the attention of neighbours and the authorities when they're arguing and they're overheard having domestic disputes. So it's not a particularly nice household for very long.
After separating from his wife in 1967, 32-year-old Honka was alone and working the graveyard shift as a night watchman.
So he rented a small one-bedroom apartment, which was very close to the red light district in Hamburg. And in this apartment, he created his own little world, basically. He wasn't subject to any kind of informal surveillance of other people who would question, you know, what are you doing? So it was his own little zone, essentially. And this is a place where he would live in something of a little bubble, to be honest. So I think this is a recipe for disaster for someone like him.
Honka spent his free time drinking in 24-hour bars around the Reeperbahn in the city's notorious red light district.
There will be lots of reasons why people turn to alcohol, but I think in this case, here's an individual who didn't have a lot of control over his life as a child. There was a lot going on around him that he had very little power over whatsoever. And what can happen with people who experience circumstances like these is that in adulthood, they develop an intense need to be in control of what's going on around them. And for some people, that will manifest itself in self-medication.
Die eine Kneipe war dieser berühmte goldene Handschuh.
One of the bars was the famous Goldene Handschuh, the golden glove. It was named like that because it belonged to a famous boxer. And right across was the Elbschlosskeller, a bar where mainly homeless alcoholics or drifters hung out. Well, they drank plenty of alcohol. The preferred drink was grain schnapps with lemonade.
Das Getränk war Korn mit Brause, es wurde getanzt.
There was dancing, and it didn't get cleaned very often. It was open all hours, round the clock, and looked accordingly. You had to be careful not to stick to the floor. And those were the surroundings and conditions.
Waren also Menschen, die ganz unten angelangt waren, die da verkehrten.
These people had reached rock bottom, at least the women who went there. And then, the men would take the women home with them to play sex games.
Zu Hause sexuelle Spiele zu machen.
The Golden Glove soon became one of Honka's favourite haunts. He would regularly visit after finishing his shift as a night watchman. The owner of the bar, Jörn Nenberg, became friendly with the man his regulars knew as Fiete.
Wenn in Uniform gekommen ist, dann war man kommt.
When he came in wearing his uniform, you could see that he was very proud of himself. But he was never pushy. People who didn't know him, who just saw him briefly, thought he looked a bit odd. Because Fiete wasn't exactly a pin-up. At times he looked a bit creepy.
Auch manchmal ein bisschen gruselig aus.
A traffic accident in his 20s had left Honka with a crooked nose and a pronounced squint.
Well, here's an individual who has never really had a very positive relationship when it comes to women. So he was abandoned by his mother. The relationship that he had with his wife was quite chaotic and quite unstable. So there isn't a really positive association with women in his mind at this point in time.
Honka is a mentally unstable, intellectually challenged runt of a man who has profound sexual problems. He finds sex with a woman almost impossible and therefore demands oral sex. He is a drunk, a loner, who has had almost no paternal, maternal caring as a child. He was no one's idea of Mr. Universe, but he was clearly, or at least able, and could afford to hire prostitutes.
Honka had taken a liking to older prostitutes who could often be found in the bars around the Reeperbahn.
Das waren ja nun Obdachlose, die kein Einkommen hatten.
These were homeless women who had no income. He had money. He could offer alcohol.
In November 1971, a worker at a factory yard in the Gaustrasse came across some junk, and when he rummaged through it, he found body parts.
So. Und zwar sieht das eine Hand.
He saw a hand sticking out of a pile of rubbish. He immediately informed the police. And the local officers on duty, who were the first to arrive at the scene, informed us that the findings were indeed body parts. We went to investigate further and spotted several chopped up body parts. Only the torso and the right leg were missing. Everything else was there, but cut into pieces.
Alles andere war da. Aber zerteilt.
Besides the body parts, we found breasts that had been cut off, suggesting that this was in all probability related to a sex offence.
Ein Sittlichkeitsdelikt war.
Although the head was badly decomposed, in 1971 experts were able to reconstruct it well enough to enable the police to provide a photo to the press. The victim was identified as 42-year-old prostitute Gertrude Breuer. Before the fire at Honka's apartment, the case had remained unsolved.
Und somit hat sich eigentlich der Kreis geschlossen von den Leichenteilen.
We had come full circle, from the body parts found in the Gaussstrasse to the torso found on the premises of Honka's living quarters, and subsequently we could charge him with this crime.
Anlasten.
Honka had murdered Gertrude in December 1970 after picking her up in the Golden Glove. It was the first time he'd killed someone. Investigators believe he strangled the 42-year-old to death because she refused to have sex with him. He dismembered her body using a saw.
To simply cut off a limb is a fairly straightforward procedure. You need a knife to get through the flesh and a saw to get through the bone. It doesn't have to be a complex thing to do. It's not like you're a surgeon doing an operation.
Golden Glove barman Jörn Nernberg had unknowingly assisted Honka in meeting his victims.
He always said in a sneaky way, "Hey, Jörn, give that one a little drink, but don't tell her it's from me." "Okay, Vita, no problem." Gave the drink. "Who's that from?" "From someone." "Oh, okay, good." They didn't ask much, as long as they had something to drink.
Gertrude Breuer, a hairdresser and part-time prostitute, was a regular in the bar.
Time after time, prostitutes are killed because no one reports them missing. They live on the edge of the law. They're long past in connection with their families. They are living in a twilight world. And, well, you miss a prostitute, well, she could have given up, or she could have gone to another city, or she could have gone back to her mother, or whatever it may have been. And so they're very seldom tracked.
Even though Honka refused to cooperate with the police, they had now identified one of his victims. Each time they interrogated him, detectives tried to find out more about the other 3 women.
She was gone for a while. One day she came back wearing nice clothes, really quite fancy, and I said, "Where have you been? I really thought you were dead." "No, I have a new boyfriend and he's wonderful."
But that new boyfriend was Fritz Honka, who strangled her to death in December 1974.
Honka always seems to me to be kind of an accidental serial killer. He didn't fit what the BAU, the FBI's behavioural unit, call organised. He was completely disorganised. These were crimes of opportunity. He wasn't stalking these women. He wasn't planning their killings. They happened. They were part of his tragic character and part of his drinking and part of the fact that he found any kind of sexual relationship with women almost impossible, and this was the only way he could find to satisfy those desires that he had.
The West German press were fascinated with Honka. Photographer Lutz Jaffe managed to capture a photograph of the mysterious killer.
Back then, you could have pretty good contacts within the police. And I knew that Honka would be taken either to prison or to appear in front of the magistrate at a specific time. Someone from the police had told me about it.
Das hat mir irgendjemand erzählt von der Polizei damals, und dann habe ich mich da auf die Lauer.
Well, and then I lay in wait for him to arrive. That's how this photo came about. As he turned around when I called, "Mr. Honka," that's how I managed to catch him.
So, und so habe ich ihn dann erwischt.
The police were trying to determine a motive for the murders. Interviews with local prostitutes who'd been with Honka and lived to tell the tale revealed shocking facts about his perverse sexual tastes.
Diese Frauen, die seiner Wohnung entkommen sind,
The women who escaped from his home were very lucky. The interrogation of these women hinted at his sexual practices, and these were sometimes catastrophic. I don't want to go into every detail here, but it was pretty terrible.
Also ich will das hier nicht im Einzelnen aufführen, aber das war schon fürchterlich. Und dass man sagt,
It's possible these sexual practices got out of hand and became excessive, which, I have to say, might have led to the death of a woman.
möglicherweise muss ich sagen, zum Tode so einer Frau geführt haben.
One of the surviving victims showed the police a scar she'd received in a brutal sexual encounter with Honka.
Weil sie sich ja so aufgeregt hat über Fritz Honka, die alte Sau.
Because she was so upset about Fritz Honka, that dirty old swine, as she called him, she pulled up her skirt, took off her underwear, and pointed to a scar beside her vagina. "What is that?" I asked her. She then told us that during a sexual encounter with Fritz Honka, he had penetrated her with a broom handle. That's where the injury had come from, and she ended up in hospital. She was furious, angry beyond belief, you could say.
Ohnmächtig vor Wut, kann man sagen.
And she wasn't the only one who needed medical treatment after spending the night with Honka.